Okay, who was here for the earlier session? Who can give a summary for those who weren't here? Okay, I saw one hand. Jotadhari. Stephen?
Let's see. I don't know if I'll be able to do a very good synopsis of it.
Okay.
But Swamiji was trying to give, I think, from my understanding, a background to the Atmajnanananda Jagat Hitayacha, and why Swami, and kind of what led Swami Vivekananda to decide to have that be the motto of the Ramakrishna order. And so talking about the influence and the teachings of Thakur and how that sometimes didn't seem to align with that motto, but given the context of a lot of these teachings, that it actually does align with that.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've been trying to play the devil's advocate. Dad, you know what that means? Devil's advocate. You intentionally take the other side of an argument to show that the first side is actually right. So there were people who criticized both of these ideals. One, that the goal of the order and the goal for the monks and all the devotees should be liberation, number one, moksha, number one, and the other two is to work for the welfare of the world. So I was trying to show how apparently there are difficulties with both of these. If we look at the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, and if we look at even things that Swamiji himself said, but if we look a little deeper, we find that not only is there no contradiction, but is actually fulfilling the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna in a very deep and significant way. So I tried to start with giving a little background. Now I want to focus on the first part, mokshatam, liberation. And we saw before that one of the difficulties with this is, first of all, we don't know exactly what it means. What does liberation mean? And what did Swamiji mean by that? Mukti or moksha. And we have lots of different ideas, even within the Vedantic tradition, and of course in other traditions, Western religions, they have their own idea of what liberation or salvation or final emancipation or heaven, whatever, all different concepts and ideas. And what did Swamiji mean? And what does it mean to us? So initially, when Swamiji came up with this dual ideal for the order, these twin ideals for the order, it wasn't simply this idea of working for the welfare of the world that was problematic. That was the main thing. His brother disciples just remembered Thakur, saying so many times, first realize God, then worry about the world, statements like that. But even this idea of mukti, actually the objection is more based on things that Swamiji himself said. Because this idea of mukti or moksha is so well accepted in the Vedantic tradition, Hindu tradition, there's not too much that we can say against it. But Thakur, we saw from time to time, would say that bhakti is far greater than mukti, and then Swamiji also could sometimes be very strong and very critical of those who are seeking their own salvation, that type of idea. So I wanted to go through this mokshatam, this portion, this section. This desire for liberation is considered one of the basic elements in Vedanta, one of the basic prerequisites. If we don't have that, according to many thinkers, there's not much reason to engage in spiritual practice. We have a certain goal in life. We're trying to achieve this, whatever we mean by liberation. So, mumukshutvam. This becomes one of the key features in Vedanta. In the Vivekachudamani, we read in the very beginning that we only get this through the grace of God. That there are three things that we need. One is a human birth, manushyatvam, and then this mumukshutvam, this desire for liberation, and mahapurusha samsrayaha, if we get the grace of a great soul. These are the three things that are necessary. So this desire for liberation has always been considered one of the very necessary prerequisites for spiritual practice. And we see that in all of the texts in Gita, we have all of these ideas, moksha parayana, that we have to have that as the ultimate vision, that we want to have some type of liberation. Now, of course, we can understand it in different ways. What does it mean? And we'll see when we get into this that we have our concept of Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti, two different types of liberation. One is while we're living, and one is what happens after death. So a lot of it has a lot of these ideas tied in with it. After if we attain liberation or salvation, then what happens? Is there some heaven that we go to? Do we merge in the absolute? All different ideas about that. But we also have this concept that we can achieve this state of perfection and freedom while we're living. And this is something that is kind of a distinguishing feature between, I would say, the Vedantic tradition, Hinduism, Buddhism, and the religions that grew out of that, and the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, where the emphasis is more after the body falls, then what happens to the soul after that. So a lot of this will hinge on how we understand this term moksha or mukti. So the first question is, if we take this idea of liberation or salvation, should this be the driving force in our spiritual life? Or are we, and of course for many traditions, especially the Buddhist tradition, there's so much emphasis on this world is full of suffering, we don't want to be born again, we want to get out of it, a little bit escapist, at least it sounds that way. Should this be the emphasis? We don't see Sri Ramakrishna talking in these terms at all. So there's more this idea that we want to achieve something here and now. But so this is one question that we can ask in the beginning. Should this be the main incentive for us in spiritual life? Then second is, if that's true, is it a bit of a selfish ideal? Because these are all individual things. I can attain my liberation and then the rest of the world can do whatever it wants. It won't affect anybody but me. So is it selfish? Is it pessimistic? This world is such a horrible place. I never want to be born again. I want to get out of it. This is very much a Buddhist idea. This idea that sarvam dukkham, everything is suffering. Yeah. We just do whatever we can so we get out of this. So is it escapist? So we have all of these issues here. And as I say, much of it depends on our understanding of the metaphysics of the whole thing. What do we really believe in with regard to afterlife? Or the idea of heaven, or idea of rebirth? Is there an endless round of life after life after life? And then again, this big distinction between Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti. Are we more concerned about here and now? Can we attain a state of liberation and perfection and freedom while living? and then we don't care about what happens afterwards. Everything will take care of itself. The idea is if we attain this state of the Jivan Mukti, then the other one is automatically taken care of. If one achieves this God realization, one achieves self-realization, perfection in this very lifetime, then all the karma gets burned up, and there's no seed there to cause any future birth. But what happens after that, that's also very problematic. Do we go to some heaven? Do we merge with God? Do we live in the presence of all different theories and ideas about that? So I want to go through some of these ideas, different ways that we understand this idea of mukti or moksha, and what Swamiji probably had in mind when he held that before us as part of this twin ideal of the order, and how it fits in with basic teachings of Swamiji and Sri Ramakrishna. So, we start out with these two basic categories, Jivan Mukti, liberation while living. And the second, Videha Mukti, that basically means freedom from rebirth. We're putting it in a very negative way, because we don't know exactly what it'll mean. Different things in all different traditions, but this is the one thing in common. Whether they're dualists or non-dualists, it doesn't seem to matter. They may have different ideas of what happens to the soul that attains perfection, but they'll all agree that this samsara, this round of birth and death, comes to an end. So this second idea, this Videha Mukti, may be stressed more in certain traditions, and then there'll be others, and I would say our Vedanta tradition, of course, that the emphasis is more that we want to achieve God realization here and now, or self-realization, or truth, or freedom from bondage, because bondage, most of the time, is of our own making. It's not some deep metaphysical concept. We're bound by our own fears and doubts and ignorance and all of these things. That's something that is very tangible to us. So, Videha Mukti. Every religion has some idea regarding what happens to the individual after death. Even the atheist who says that nothing happens, that's a metaphysical doctrine. Right? That's a theory, right? And there are Charvakas, there are materialists in the Indian tradition that believe that. In fact, there's one very odd group. They were called, what were they called? Samsara Mochakas. That if they would go around and kill somebody, they were freeing them from samsara. Yeah, because they didn't believe in rebirth. And they believed that this life was suffering. So mochikas, they were freeing them, samsara mochikas. I don't know if there were really people like that, but we read about things like that. So all different theories. In Buddhism, we have all the Theravada schools, the southern schools, that for them, really, this idea of liberation really means that no more rebirth and no more individuality, nothing. That the flame is blown out, nirvana. Nirvana means flame. It's very interesting that in the Buddhist tradition we'll have this nirvana, and the Hindu tradition will have this anirvana. So anirvana, very common name, right? Huh? Anirvana. It means that that flame can't be blown out. That flame of life, that soul, is eternal. And the Buddhist tradition in the South, especially, is this opposite idea that as long as this seed of karma is there, that there'll be rebirth. When that's burned up, then there's nothing left. So these are all different theories. We don't know too much about what actually happens. This is a lot of it is speculative, and a lot of it is a belief system, what we like to believe, what our scriptures say, what our tradition teaches us. But it's very different from this other idea of some experience here and now, which is something that we don't doubt. was it very tangible and real to us. Otherwise, we have to wait and see what happens. Right? We don't really know exactly what will happen. So, the different schools of Vedanta actually have more quarrels about this than anything else. I had a philosophy professor who he made a very brilliant statement, I thought, that say the dualists and the non-dualists and the qualified non-dualists, they didn't really quarrel so much about is God with form or not form, and is Saguna and Nirguna Brahman and all of that. Their real quarrel was, does the individual merge in Brahman at the end and there's no individuality, or does some individuality remain? So is there some enjoyment to this? If the individuality remains, then we have some philosophical problems. That how we go from the finite to the infinite, so technical things. And if there's complete merging, then what fun is that? Huh? Is that really what we want, where we completely disappear and the drop goes back to the ocean? So it's a very confusing subject here. But the main quarrel will be those who staunchly said, no, there has to be some enjoyment in heaven afterwards. There has to be some continuation of individuality in the state of liberation. And the others say, no, as long as there's individuality, then there's separation, and it's a finite condition, and it can only when we merge in the infinite do we put an end to this round. So anyhow, these are all the different quarrels that we find among the different schools, Hinduism, Buddhism, and everything. But we'll find at least that there's some common features. As I said before, liberation will always be opposed to rebirth, whereas in most of the Western religions, your two choices are eternal salvation or eternal damnation. And of course, this strikes us as very unfair, this idea that some people, if they make a few mistakes in this lifetime, that it should have some eternal consequences like that. So the Vedantic position, Buddhist position, we can say also, that we have a chance to each time improve, and everybody will attain liberation. It's a much nicer doctrine, and it appeals to our sense of fairness and our sense of logic also. So no matter how many times we fail and have to repeat 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, everybody will graduate eventually. Mm-hmm. So this is the position that we have in Hinduism. It's a nice idea. And as I say, this element of fairness appeals very much to most people. So we'll find also that these different concepts of liberation in different traditions depend very much on our understanding of the nature of the self. Right? So those schools that believe that there is an individual soul, jiva, that the jiva is real, for them naturally the state of liberation is, if the jiva is real, then it will remain in that state of liberation. If Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, if it says that the jivahood, the jivaness of the jiva is based simply on false identification with the superimpositions, then those superimpositions are gone, then there's only oneness. And that oneness exists here and now, only we don't realize it. So a completely different way of looking at the whole thing. So these different concepts of final liberation in Vedanta hinge very much on these different ideas of the nature of the self, and on this whole concept of rebirth, and that this lifetime we're struggling to get rid of this bad karma and to attain knowledge, and that this stays with us life after life, that we keep accumulating, we keep getting better. If we don't achieve the goal in this lifetime, we have the next one to do it. And everything that we experience and everything that we do, we have this phrase, yata karma, yata shrutam. Everything, yata karma, according to our actions in this life and according to our experiences. We may not do something, but we may see something. We may have a certain type of life experiences and everything. These are responsible for this sack of karma that we carry with us from one birth to another birth. So this shapes everything. Just as if we see one wave, it'll be above the surface of the water, and then it'll go underneath. That's that in-between period. We don't know much about that. But when it comes up again as a new wave, that new wave will be based on the size and the shape and the strength and everything of the previous wave, even though it may not have all of the same water molecules. That may be different because we'll take a different body, but the force and everything for the karmic element is supposed to be the one thing in common. It'll take us from one birth to another. This karma theory is interesting. The Hindu doctrine and the Buddhist doctrine are so different with regard to the nature of the self, and yet they both accept karma. How can there be karma if there's no real individual? In Buddhists, they won't accept this idea of Atman. Right? So it's like a fire brigade. You have all these different people lined up, and there's one bucket of water, and that gets passed from one person to another person to another person to another person until you get to the end. Yeah? So there's no one individual carrying the bucket, but that bucket of karma is still going from one lifetime to another lifetime. The Hindu tradition, our concept will be more that one person is carrying that bucket, and the contents of it, change. In both cases, it changes each time. But so they also accept it, and Swamiji actually liked this idea. He said that there's reincarnation, but no reincarnating soul. So that means he accepts this Advaitic idea that there's no reality to the individual jiva, but there is this concept of one. So he said this Buddhist position is really true, but it can be only understood through Advaita Vedanta. Yeah. So Swamiji, of course, was so thoughtful. Many of these things we don't think about too much. It was a very thoughtful way, because how do we explain this whole concept of rebirth without believing in the ultimate reality of the individual soul? It's very hard to do. Of course, we talk about the subtle body carrying everything and the light of consciousness, but still, these are very difficult types of things. So the whole theory is based on this very scientific doctrine of cause and effect. That whatever we see, whatever we experience, all of these things have to have a certain effect, and this will change the karmic makeup of the individual, and nothing is lost. So whatever we gain in spiritual life, we get to keep. So we're always accumulating, always. And if we do bad things and everything, these are setbacks. And we don't have to start over again. This is the theory. It's a nice idea. We don't really know how much of these things are scientifically verifiable or not. But look at King Bharat. That when he was a very pure soul, wonderful soul, of course. And yet he got attached to the deer, so he had to be reborn as a deer. But he didn't have to be reborn as a deer, and then a dog, and then a cat, and then a cow, and all of these things. The very life after that, once he got rid of that little funny thing, then he was born as a great sage. So there may be some little karmic setbacks, but what we gain, we get to keep. This is it. Dr. Gita and all of the scriptures will say that. And we have this other nice doctrine that the effect is actually the cause, just in a different form. So this is that same idea that the second wave will really be the first wave taking a different form. So there is some type of individuality, like the wave is an individual thing on the surface of the water, but ultimately it's one with the ocean. So these are some of these very different ideas we have, and this transformation takes place, usually very gradually, but each wave will eventually end up in the shore. It'll become less and less and less. That means the force of the karma will become less and less, and then each wave will attain that freedom. So this is that idea of liberation from this idea of final liberation. Not this idea of the Jivan Mukti, but this idea of final liberation. Swamiji gave a very brilliant explanation of all of this from a more Advaitic point of view, when he talks about, turning page after page of a book over. He says, he's comparing each lifetime to, say, a different chapter. Each day will be one page of the book. The soul is not moving, going anywhere. That we read one page, we turn it over, then we finish one chapter, that may be a whole lifetime. We don't go anywhere. The book is changing. Nature is changing in front of us. We go to the next one until the book is finished. And then we remain where we always were. So he says, I am omnipresent, eternal. Where can I go? Where am I not already? I am reading this book of nature. Page after page I am finishing and turning over. And one dream of life after another goes away. Another page of life is turned. Another dream of life comes, and it goes away, rolling and rolling. And when I finished my reading, I let go and stand aside. I throw away the book, and the whole thing is finished. So we have different theories of what happens. We have different interpretations. But the one thing that seems to be in common with all of these is that there's no more rebirth, whatever that means. So we really can't say too much about what this state of final liberation is like. We have so many different ideas. There are different lokas that the soul can go to, Pitri Loka, Chandra Loka, Surya Loka, Brahma Loka, all of these different things. Holy Mother and many of the other Swamis of our order, Swami Shivananda and others, had tremendous faith in this idea of Ramakrishna Loka. The devotees of Thakur, that they'll go to some realm. These are subtle realms, that they'll go there and they'll have the company of Thakur Ma, all of the direct disciples, other devotees and everything. These are not scientific things. Every tradition will have its own concept. The Vaishnavis, they'll go to some Nitya Vrindavan, some internal Vrindavan, and they'll be sitting on the banks of the river and the Yamuna, and Krishna will be grazing the cattle and all of that. Every tradition has its own idea, and it may be that they're all right. It may be that it's a subjective experience. There's another thing we don't quite understand: what's subjective, what's objective. But it may be that we, according to the desire of the heart, this is also the type of experience that we have when we give up the body. Maybe. It's hard to say, because these places don't have any physical location. It's in some type of subtle realm, which means some type of mental realm that way. These are mysterious things, and I really don't want to get too much into this, because we're going to emphasize this other type of this Jivan Mukti. But still, we see that there are all these different concepts, and then of course there's the non-dualist, who says that, well, if we're really one with Brahman now, and we don't know it, then naturally we'll emerge in Brahman. Now, what is that like? If there's no individual to experience it, then is it even an experience? We don't really know. All we can say is that this descriptions that we have of the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi are more or less identical. We can almost assume, at least from the Advaitic point of view, that ultimately merging in Brahman after the body falls and merging in Brahman, the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi will be the same. Now, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, there's no one to really experience, that bliss of that state. But coming down from that state, the individual is filled with bliss and joy and completely transformed. So we have to assume that there's something there. It's not the nirvana of the Buddhist tradition where there's just a complete blank and emptiness. But again, this is really just a type of speculation, we can say. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but just to give some idea of all these different ideas, there's some Vaishnava schools that talk about 5 different types of mukti. Yeah, this is very interesting. That Salokya, that means we can go and we can live in the same realm, the same loka, as whoever we worship. So we go to Vaikuntha, something like that. Salokya. Samipya, we can have some closeness. We can live in some very close relationship with God. Then Sarupya, we can even take a similar form. We can take some divine form like that. Sadharmya, we find this term in Gita quite a bit. That if God is full of love and compassion, we'll be full of love and compassion. We'll take on the same qualities. And then Sayujya, that we can merge in God. We can merge in. Now, the interesting thing is that the Sayujya is the worst. For the dualists, they don't want to merge in God. They want to have a little bit of separation, enjoy that relationship. Even Thakur used to speak in terms like that. He used to recite that Ram Prasad song, that I don't want to become sugar, I want to taste sugar. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that one is wrong. This idea that I can become one with the Brahman. He said, no, actually, I am Brahman, one. But to keep a little trace of ego, a little trace of separation, enjoy that relationship. So for them, this Sayujya is the lowest form of these 5 types of mukti, and they don't really want it. In fact, they'll shun it like poison. This is maybe a little bit fanatical, dualistic movements like that. We have a lot of good hints and clues about all of this from Gita. Gita is one of the texts that talks about this more than others. And it's interesting that Sri Krishna couches it in the language that he does. He says, when one attains me, many of the verses are like that. Attaining me, one is not born again. Attaining me, so we find that type of devotional language. We don't take it in a sectarian sense. It means realizing God, something will happen. So, and he also talks about the sadharmya, that when we attain that, then there's no more rebirth. So we have different verses, reaching the highest perfection and having attained me. These great souled ones are no more subject to rebirth, which is the abode of pain and ephemeral. Then all the worlds, O Arjuna, including the realm of Brahma, are subject to return. But after attaining me, O son of Kunti, there is no more rebirth. And what is called the unmanifest and imperishable has been described as the supreme goal. That is my highest state, having attained which there is no return. Then again, chapter 14. Those who, having devoted themselves to this knowledge, have attained to my being. Again, mama sadharmyam, agadaha, neither born at the time of creation nor troubled at the time of dissolution. So, the point of all this is just to show that every religious tradition, every philosophical tradition, every human being will find that there's something very mysterious about life. We don't know why we come to it. We don't know why we leave or where we go afterwards. Every tradition tries to come up with some answer to these things. It's natural that the human mind will want it. Those who have some higher type experience, even their explanations may not satisfy everyone, because the subjective element will be there also. So it's very hard to say any of this, but in the Vedantic Hindu tradition, at least we have this common feature that this is supposed to put an end to rebirth, and what happens after that, we simply have to say is mysterious. We don't really know. So, if we look at the second type, because this is really all of our emphasis, the emphasis that Sri Ramakrishna gives, because we almost never hear him talking about what happens after death. Every once in a while he'll say something like, according to Gita, this happens, something like that. Or he'll say, yes, we have to accept this idea of samskaras and karma and everything, but he never gives any of that type of emphasis, that may you not be born again and all of this type of thing. Everything is on this other type, this idea that we have to realize our true nature, or have some direct vision of God in this very lifetime, however we understand it. So let's now switch to this idea of Jivan Mukti, because we may decide that, well, whatever happens after this lifetime is over, it'll take care of itself, and that I'm not going to worry about that. If I lead a good life now, I don't have to worry about what happens afterwards. This is really the ultimate conclusion of this Gita. This is Nahi Kalyana Krit Kastya Durgatim Tadagachiti. He said, oh my child, don't worry. Don't worry about any of this. If you're a good person, nothing bad will happen afterwards. That's enough. We don't have to know exactly what will happen, because it's no way of exactly knowing. But this idea that we can attain freedom, we can attain perfection, we can have some experience of the divine, we can realize our true nature here and now, this is something that is far more important, and which is stressed in the Vedantic tradition, and which really distinguishes this tradition from other traditions, from, I would say, Western philosophy and religion, where all the emphasis is you lead a good life, you'll go to heaven afterwards. Well, we have this idea that we can attain that very highest knowledge and that highest type of bliss and joy here and now, this very lifetime, this very minute, this very moment, if we can somehow transcend all of these things that are keeping us in this state of bondage. So there is a type of freedom which comes from freedom from the passions, freedom from anger, from jealousy, from hatred, freedom from excessive desire and obsessions and addictions and all of that, freedom from selfishness, all of the things which make our lives miserable, freedom from fear, all of these things. And this is very tangible. We don't even have to be religious people. We don't have to believe in anything. We don't have to believe in heavens or hells or God or devil or anything. We all can have a sense that it's our own weakness, it's our own anger and jealousy and passions and things that keep us in a certain type of state of bondage, where we feel that we're not free to react the way we want to, that somehow our own personality, our own tendencies and everything determine the way we react to things. There's a beautiful question that Arjuna asks Sri Krishna in Gita. He says, why is it that we do things that we shouldn't do, even when we know that we shouldn't do them, and we do them without wanting to do them, as if we're being forced to do them? It's a brilliant question, because we do that. We're supposed to be very intelligent people, right? But we're not very intelligent people. Sometimes we know that, say somebody says something to us, and I know there's nothing to be gained by getting angry, by losing my temper, by yelling at that person, and still I do it. And then I feel that, well, I couldn't help myself. Right? So he says, why do we do that? It's such a nice question. Yeah. So then Sri Krishna says, yeah, this is the nature of the mind. The mind is filled with these rajas and these lower gunas, and we have our desires and our anger and our ignorance, and we don't really, we're bound by our own nature and personality. If we can attain freedom from that, this is also a type of mukti. And we can attain freedom from that by knowing who we are, our real nature, knowing about the divine presence within, however we understand it. So then we live in this world as a free soul, not bound by anything. The old karma, which used to drag us around like a noose on our neck, is gone. That all gets burned up. The knots of the heart are untied. The doubts are all gone. Karma gets burned up. This is what happens after we have some experience, some direct experience. For the jnani, it'll be of the real nature of the self. The devotee, it'll be some experience of the divine, God dwelling within, however we understand it. So now we can see that when Swamiji is giving so much emphasis to mokshartam, for the sake of liberation, he's not really talking about this idea, let me not be born again. He doesn't care about that kind of thing. In fact, he said the opposite so many times. It's really this idea, let me attain the highest goal of life here and now. This type of mukti or freedom, we can almost say God realization. There's a very nice book that was written by this Swami Nirvananandaji. Swami Nirvananandaji was a disciple and one of the main attendants of Swami Brahmananda. And he's very well known in our order because Swami Brahmananda was pleased with him and blessed him, may you attain Brahmajnana, you attain knowledge of Brahman. He lived to be quite old. I met him many years ago. Anyhow, he wrote a very nice book called Devloka Kotha. And he wrote in that, one's own happiness and one's own mukti alone. So one's own happiness, one's own mukti alone, meaning final liberation, were never the goal of Thakur Ma Swamiji or Maharaj Swami Brahmananda. So he's very clearly saying that forget about this idea when we're talking about this goal of life is to attain freedom, mukti. He's not talking about this. This is why Swamiji has given us this great mantra, Atmano Mokshartam. It sounds like a complete contradiction in terms. He's saying he didn't care about mukti, that's why he said strive for mukti. But it means he didn't care for final liberation. Mokshartam has to mean that we're trying to get liberation here and now. That means freedom. That means attain the ultimate truth of our real nature. So we can see from this one statement of Swami Nirvanananda a very great distinction to be made between this idea of final liberation and this idea of illumination. This is really, we're striving for this illumination. Even in the Buddhist tradition, we have nirvana and parinirvana. Nirvana is something we get here and now. We become illumined. And this final nirvana, or mahasamadhi, that's when the body falls. We don't have to pay too much attention to that. If we get illumination now, everything else will take care of itself. We don't have to bother with any of that. So, this takes away that whatever pessimism or selfishness or escapism comes from this idea, let me not be born again. So that gets eliminated from all of this, and we find that it's not a selfish thing, but there's some very deep-seated longing to realize that we feel we're living in a state of bondage, we're living in a state of ignorance, we don't know who we are, we don't have any clear idea about goals in life and everything, and this tremendous longing for truth, or this tremendous longing from direct experience, tremendous longing for the divine. There's nothing selfish about it. We get pulled into this. See, Thakur, did he ever decide that I must realize God? No, he was swept away. The storm came and just swept him away. So we can't accuse anybody of having a selfish desire, because it's something that just overcomes somebody. When this real longing for God comes, then we see that all of the other goals in life become subordinate to that. This becomes the overriding goal of life, and we don't care about what happens after this lifetime. It's something that we want here and now, a very strong type of thing. So this very unmistakable conviction that we're leading a life based on a lot of false ideas. Swamiji has a beautiful quote about Buddha, that calling things by the wrong names and everything, that it became unbearable for him. He had to find the truth. So this is the type of liberation that we're seeking, that we see everything else is short-sighted, everything else is full of vanity, and that our priorities now get completely shaken up. Things that we may see now as very important goals of life, we see as very secondary. And this one goal of God realization. How can we realize God? How can we realize the self? That this becomes the goal of life, and this feeling of bondage becomes something intolerable. So then we can see what Swamiji means, that ultimately this is what we're striving for in this lifetime. To achieve the full potential of this lifetime, which means that if we're already perfect, then perfection is something within our grasp. We just have to eliminate all of these false ideas and these things which keep us in this state of bondage. So, for Swamiji, this really meant passion for truth. This is mokshatam. And it's, as I say, it's not a premeditated type of thing. This will sweep over some people sometimes. They'll reach a stage in life where everything else just seems they have no lasting value. And this is the one thing needed in life. Sometimes it comes at a very young age. People renounce everything for it. Sometimes it comes later. It doesn't matter when it comes, but just so it comes. So when we look at the teachings of Swamiji, and this is a very interesting thing, there's a book that was published many years ago called The Teachings of Swami Vivekananda. And it's what it is, they have different topics. Each chapter is a different topic heading. So you'll see Atman, you'll see Brahman, you'll see something on the social service, all different things. And one chapter is called Freedom and Mukti. Okay? Freedom and Mukti, so this is liberation. And there are 26 entries some of the best, nicest quotes of Swamiji, all about what he means by this idea of mukti. Not a single one has anything to do with ending this round of birth and death. Not a single one. And there's so many beautiful things. So they're all about the attainment of freedom, the attainment of perfection in this very lifetime, here and now. I'll just read a few of these things. He says, the idea of freedom is the only true idea of salvation. Freedom from everything, the senses, whether of pleasure or pain, from good as well as evil. Then he says, if we give up our attachment to this little universe of the senses or of the mind, we shall be free immediately. The only way to come out of bondage is to go beyond the limitations of law, to go beyond causation. Blessedness, eternal peace arising from perfect freedom is the highest conception of religion, underlying all the ideas of God in the Vedanta. Absolute, free existence, not bound by anything. No change, no nature. Nothing can produce a change in him. The same freedom is in you and in me, and is the only real freedom. So, for Swamiji, freedom means understanding our real nature, which is the same as the nature of God, ultimately. Except, of course, we don't have this power of creation and all of that, but in terms of this calmness and perfection, all of the ideas that we have of the nature of the Ishvara, the idea of the same to all, no distinctions in everything, these are all the things that we ourselves want to realize and want to adopt in our lives. So, the emphasis on realization is on this idea that we can attain to that state of perfection. We can attain to that here and now, and we don't worry about this idea of final liberation. In fact, as Swamiji got older and as he got more dedicated to this mission in life, we find that this idea of final liberation became something very distasteful to him. And he saw it as something very selfish, actually. There's so many interesting things that he said. He remarked once, when I used to roam about all over India in my sadhana stage, I passed many days in solitary caves in meditation, and many a time decided to starve myself to death because I could not attain mukti. Now I have no desire for mukti. I do not care for it so long as one single individual in the universe remains without attaining it. So he started to see it as something selfish, and he saw it as opposed to this idea of being more interested in the welfare of other people than in our own welfare. And he would say so many times that better to be born again and again if he can be the slightest bit helpful. He even wrote, to help even a dog, I'd be willing to be born again and again. And then, of course, his most famous statement. This was a letter written to Mary Hale. And may I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries so that I may worship the only God that exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls. And above all, my God the wicked, my God the miserable, my God the poor of all races, of all species, is the special object of my worship. So, Swamiji's attitude towards not final liberation, but those who saw that as their ultimate goal, was, at the very least we can say he didn't look upon that as a very high ideal in life. He wanted people who didn't care about their own liberation, who were willing to go to hell, he used to say, even to help a single person. So this was really his emphasis. And interestingly enough, we find it perfectly consistent with Sri Ramakrishna's own ideas and different things that he said. Because Thakur never talked about this idea of final liberation, that we have to get out of this life, that is the only misery. He used to talk about those who are very clever. They can maneuver through this lifetime, and they can, and with great joy, see everything is Leela and everything, that we don't have to. That's why he liked, there were two songs. That one was a Ram Prasad song, that this world is what did he call it? Framework of delusion. Framework of delusion and everything. And then there was a Ram Prasad song. He lived in this village of Halishohar. There was a Goswami who used to follow him around and make his life miserable. He was also a good poet. And Ram Prasad would compose one song, he'd compose an opposite song. Now, in this particular case, Thakur liked the other song better, because he wrote, "This world is a mansion of mirth." Mansion of mirth.
Oh,
yeah. And like King Janaka, here we can balance and enjoy. So it's like King Janaka, I drink my milk from a brimming cup. It's something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So Thakur didn't emphasize, and he never emphasized that idea. This world is so full of suffering, we have to get out of it, whatever you can do. He also didn't like that idea. He saw that as very much a lower type of idea. So he liked this both this idea of the karma yogi who was willing to sacrifice himself, and also the bhakta who cares more for the attainment of devotion. This, for him, this is a higher ideal. We had one Swami, not very well known. He was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda. His name was Swami Gyaneshwarananda, and he was the founder of the Chicago Center. And I remember reading a book many years ago. It was just privately published. I don't know if it's available. And this Swami used to say, I don't understand why people say that this world is full of suffering, I want to get out of it. He said, if we're devotees and we have living now with this Leela of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, what a joyful thing. How nice to be born in every birth as a devotee that way. So we don't normally hear this type of thing, but it's a very beautiful type of attitude. To enjoy the Leela of the Divine Mother. This was Thakur's idea, to see this divine play that way. So this is why he, as I say, he liked that song, I don't want to become sugar, I want to taste sugar. That because his mind was always trying to get merged in Brahman. It was the natural state of his mind to go up. He had to pull it down a little bit so that he could enjoy this divine play. Ram Prasad had the same attitude. One of his songs said, Ram Prasad says, I bow my head before both liberation and enjoyment. Bhukti Mukti. Both of these. Knowing the truth that Kali is one with Brahman, I have discarded both dharma and adharma. So, for Sri Ramakrishna, this was kind of a heroic attitude. He didn't like this idea of people who were afraid of the world, that, if I go here, I'll get attached to this, then I'll suffer from this and everything. He wanted people to be a little bit bold. He used to talk about the amateur dice player and the professional. Whatever number he wanted, he could roll it and get that number, and how he could enjoy things that way. So Swamiji's idea of mukti was very much consistent with these teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, and also so much based on Swamiji's tremendous compassionate heart, that it was always opposed to the unselfish desire to help others, to work for the welfare of others. That's why I say these two ideals cannot be understood separately. To have this longing if the longing for final liberation is contrary to working for the welfare of others, then he doesn't care for it. So his idea that through helping others, this will also be of some benefit for us. But the main idea is that we have this perfectly selfless attitude. When Swamiji says that we help ourselves, not the world, we shouldn't think that should ever be our motive for helping other people. This is a great mistake. If somebody says, "Oh, I went to the soup kitchen this morning," you say, "Why?" "Well, it's getting rid of my bad karma. It makes me feel good. This will be helpful for my liberation." And that's completely missing the point. And Swamiji's idea was, "I don't care. If I go to hell because of it, I don't care. I want to help somebody, that's all." So then benefit comes to us if we do it with that attitude. But that shouldn't be the motive for doing it. So Swamiji's ideal is not only different from this idea of final liberation, but very much contrary to it. He very much stressed this idea of don't even think about it. Don't let that be a motive for anything. He wrote in one of his letters to one of his brother disciples, "This is the test. He who is Ramakrishna's child does not seek his personal good. There's no time to care for name or fame, mukti or bhakti." And he had one disciple, Swami Virjananda, who was president of the order of the highly great realized soul, and Swamiji loved him very much. But he was very much dedicated to spiritual practice. He would spend hours and hours and hours. He would do 100,000 japa every day, sometimes 120, even 18 hours a day he would spend that way and everything. So Swamiji asked him once to go to East Bengal and to do some preaching. Now he also was a little bit of this, who am I to preach? They all said that. We all say it also. We feel very shy about that. But Swamiji said, "No. You're simply giving these ideas of Sri Ramakrishna to people. Don't think of it that you're preaching or anything like that." But he said, "I'd rather stay here and do my spiritual practice." This is not what you want to say to Swamiji. So Swamiji thundered, "You will go to hell if you seek your own salvation. Seek the salvation of others if you want to reach the highest. Kill out the desire for personal mukti." See, mokshatam. Huh? There's a goal of life to mukti, but he said, kill out the desire for personal mukti. That is the greatest of all spiritual disciplines. So, when now we have some better understanding. When Swamiji is talking about this freedom as a goal of life, what he really means is illumination. This is the ultimate goal of illumination. It's not the least bit contrary to working for the welfare of others. In fact, if we can serve others, seeing God in them, with only caring about the welfare of others, not caring about ourselves, that perfect selflessness, this is the best way for us to advance in spiritual life and really to get great joy out of life. So this is the first half of this saying. Tonight, after Arati, I'll try to wrap up the whole thing and talk about this Jagat Hitayacha, this idea that working for the welfare of the world, because we know that this also is problematic in the view of Sri Ramakrishna and even things that Swamiji said. So we can stop here now, and we have time for questions, if anybody would like to ask.